Everyone, nice to see you all here. Again, as I said before, it's quality, not quantity, that's important.
Yes.
So yeah, my name's Sarah Barber. In case you don't know me, I'm from the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences in Rapperswil in Switzerland, and I co-lead this IEA Wind Task 43. And this webinar is a webinar from the IEA Wind Task 43 webinar series. And it's called Social Problems and Digital Solutions for Sustainable Wind Energy Governance with Helena Solman. And Helena is sitting right opposite me here because she's visiting us for a project meeting. And so we thought we'd combine it with this nice presentation opportunity. So welcome. Thank you. So the rough agenda for this meeting, for this webinar, is I'll do a really brief introduction to Task 43 in case you don't know about it. But most of the time will be spent with Helena's presentation, and we've also prepared a Mentimeter and Q&A. I think when Helena's speaking, if you want to write questions in the chat, and then we can address them. If I think it's really important, I'll interrupt you, but otherwise I'll just leave you. I think we're all open to.
I like the questions.
Like, we love questions, so go ahead and ask them. And yeah, and then the Mentimeter and Q&A at the end to round off. Does anyone have any questions or anything that they need before we start? Right. So the only problem is that I'm not looking in the direction of the camera. Maybe I should be facing like this a bit. Okay, the problem I have is that I can't change the slide for some reason right now. That's great. Wait a second. All right. My PowerPoint's just broken. So sorry about that. Come on, you can do it. I'm just closing my PowerPoint and opening it again. Sorry about that. What is it? Strange background noise.
Solved.
It's solved. And my PowerPoint is loading. Come on, you can do it. And now it's probably not sharing anymore, I guess. Or is it? No, it's not. Try again.
Yeah.
Okay, so IEA Wind Task. It's still crashing. No, it's not. It's okay. So just quickly about IEA Wind Task 43. So IEA is the International Energy Agency. This task is part of a technology collaboration program, IEA Wind, which basically tries to organize cross-continent collaboration in various wind energy topics. Task 43 looks at digitalization, which we understand to mean creating value from data. So how do we actually create value from this data efficiently and cost effectively? We think about things like how to solve the fact that lots of people spend 80% of their time with data wrangling, like the average data scientist. I have to say my surveys that I've done recently at Talk and at a different conference recently, it came to the conclusion that the answer is actually 70% and not 80% in wind energy, but it's still a lot, right? If you spend 70% of your time messing around with data, that's a lot of time. Just quickly about the word digitalization. It's not the same as digitization. So digitization is about turning things into zeros and ones that computers can read. And digitalization is more like the process to create value out of this. So if you just have a digital object like a file on your computer, it doesn't mean that it's creating any value. And so we have to go along this whole chain of actually trying to create value so we can create some sort of new products, processes, business model. And that's kind of what we look at in task 43. A few years ago, we wrote this paper about the grand challenges in digitalization of wind energy. We came to the conclusion that there's kind of three areas. One of them is fair data, which has got a star next to it, but no definition. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the second one is about organizational culture, because people are using data and digital tools, and so they need to be on board as well. And then the third one is competition, which is not a typo. It's a combination of cooperation and competition. And the idea is to sort of foster digital innovation by setting up sort of competitions or getting people to work together more effectively. So there are three areas we look at in task 43. The task is kind of split into these three main working groups where we look at these three challenges, but we also try to feed the results into some use cases in working group 4, where we look at real cases where people are trying to create value from data, and we go through the whole process. We also learn from these processes and feed back into the working groups. And of course, we also disseminate everything. And also, this is kind of supposed to be a circle. So we get needs from the industry as well, and try to collect those into priority use cases and topics. We try to get people to take part. And of course, we use that in these working groups. So we're trying to go around in this circle here. And some of the things we've delivered, sorry, the resolution is terrible on this, but we've developed a few different recommended practices, or some of them are under development as we speak. Some different ontologies, also a paper about understanding organizational culture, a technical report about digital skills for wind resource assessment. In the competition area, we've completed quite a few We Do Wind challenges. We Do Wind is a separate organization that runs these challenges. And working group 4, we've had quite a few results as well. For example, we developed the wind resource assessment data model. We've written some papers about risk-based decision modeling for leading edge erosion, or decision support frameworks for health data, and things like that. So you can see a wide range of sort of technical reports, best practices, recommended practices, tools and papers that we've been delivering. We're transitioning to task 66. On the 1st of November, we're going to become task 66, and this is going to run for the next 4 years. And task 66 is looking at these three grand challenges still, but it's divided up slightly differently. So we have theme 1, fairness, theme 2, and this is kind of a new topic, readiness for intelligent systems and automation. So we have some work packages about AI readiness, but also about robotics and similar things. And then theme 3 is about organizational culture and human factors. And then we have the overarching use cases as well. So that's everything about task 43. I'll put the link to our website in case you're not familiar. And yeah, so the topics for today with Helena. So what Helena is going to talk about is more things to do with how can digital technologies move beyond the technical optimization to support things like collaborative governance. Because I mentioned before in the 3 grand challenges, it's not just about the technical part and sort of the technical development of the tools, but it's also about people, collaboration, governance. And then the second question is about how digital tools are used to facilitate integration of lots of different stakeholders and stakeholder knowledge to make decision-making more transparent and inclusive. And then the third thing, what is the role of digital tools in wind energy governance? And then finally, what opportunities and challenges are there in interdisciplinary collaboration, including in task 43, 66, but also beyond that. So just quickly, when you signed up for this webinar, we asked a couple of questions. We just so that you know what the answers were. It's quite interesting to see. So we had 19 responses. 63.2% were from research or academia. And okay, consultancy is small amount, and the rest is industry or developer. And primary interest, I guess the majority selected digital twins and decision support. Nobody selected biodiversity and environmental monitoring. And then the final question was the biggest challenge for digitalization in wind energy decision making. We gave some choices. So the most popular choices were integrating different types of knowledge and data availability and interoperability. Public trust and governance and regulation also seem to be quite important. I mean, it's obvious that nobody's going to, I mean, nobody selected the biodiversity one, but that's also because nobody here is probably working on that topic. So I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from that survey. But anyway, it's nice to see what you participants input in the beginning of this webinar. So I think now I'm going to pass on to Helena. So we worked together. Actually, when I met Helena, I really wanted to work together with her because she's one of the few people who's really actively a social scientist who's really serious about working with us technical people, and she doesn't just talk about doing it, but she actually does it. And we wanted to be a research group of engineers who actually work with social scientists as well. So eventually we managed to get a project together, which is called Code Wind, which is mentioned at the third bullet point here. This is a project that we do together, which explores about how digital co-design tools can better integrate stakeholder knowledges in the planning process. So we're really happy to work with Helen on this project, but she does more stuff as well. So she's a postdoc at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and she focuses a lot on the social dimensions of offshore wind energy. I would say particularly in the digitalization of decision making. And so as well as leading the social science research and the Code Wind project, she also has other projects where she combines qualitative social science methods with more technical studies. But I'm sure she can tell you more about that in a second. So I don't want to go to the Mentimeter survey, ignore that. I will ask Helena to share her screen and then take over the talking. If anyone's got anything to ask or say in this short transition time, then please do put your hand up or speak right now.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I will just go back to my slide where you finished and my presentation starts. Is indeed on the. Should I actually unmute myself or just if I'm talking the?
Well, you're talking into here.
I'm talking to here.
So we can,
but I'm looking into my camera, right?
Yeah, you're looking into your camera.
Good. Good. Confusing, but it all works. So thank you for this introduction. And indeed, I think it would be also really nice to share once maybe more about our Code Wind project, because I think it's one of, this kind of cool examples of when social scientists can work together with wind energy and technical experts on practical solutions. I think for today I presented a bunch of examples from my previous work where either during my PhD still or then later in my postdoc projects, I was working on this kind of ideas of how digital tools can help better design, but also planning or operation of wind energy projects. And I think I'm definitely on board with you on the definition of digitalization as being a process, but I would also add to it, that digitalization is this bigger also a societal transformation, and we're seeing that digital devices enter into our everyday lives. So I think both the experts and societal actors are nowadays using digital technologies. And so I think my works also not only shows how is it happening, but also how is it actually changing the way which we think about wind energy. And that's from both the very early design stages when experts work on these digital tools, but also when wind projects are already out there and we're thinking about how to manage them more sustainably. So my talk today will be a little bit about this kind of social problem, if you want, from the start, right? So when we're thinking about identifying societal aspects or ecological aspects, which seems not many people care here about today.
So your full screen. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry.
Slides and not full screen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So when you're thinking about indeed social problems, I think most of the time we talk about the question of acceptance, and I think it's a kind of concept that also became coined from social science about how we can actually make people accept technologies. But I think it's in my own work I try to think also much more about not only how we make people accept, but how we actually engage with people. And I think there are two digital technologies have a very big and important role in kind of trying to not only provide means for information and changing opinions, but also changing the ways in which people can actually, what you also now call co-create, right? The future or the projects. I will mention some examples of tools that I worked on with my different colleagues from different technical universities or companies, digital twins or the process of twinning, but also some of the more kind of remote or like personal digital tools like apps that people use to participate and kind of have a general discussion on this topic. So with you, like not obviously the social component of wind energy often relates to this kind of big question about opposition, right? And I think that's it's a challenge on its own from the perspective of looking at how wind energy research and innovation is happening, because oftentimes we are thinking about the fact that engineers, have great ideas, bright solutions on trying to, help us out of problems in everyday life, and wind energy is supposed to do that, right? It's supposed to help us achieve energy transition, have cleaner environments, and bring many other benefits. But at the same time, we see that there is a lot of what it's framed as opposition. And I think that while there is a real opposition to wind, I think the question of social science or of the social aspect in relation to wind is actually much broader. And so I think when we talk about actually accounting for societal aspects, I think we shouldn't just think about, from the start about how can we get rid of opposition or how can we actually convince people to accept wind. I think that's much bigger. It's about how we engage with people in order to design, energy systems for the future, how we are going to make people actually, interested and involved in questions of energy production, energy consumption, and in decisions about everyday life, basically, of how we using and dealing with impacts, both positive and negative, of wind. So when I started my PhD, actually, one of the first things was for me to kind of look into all the different concerns about wind energy. And I think then very soon I discovered that, that the acceptance of wind is not just a matter of a simple yes or no to projects, and definitely not a matter of a single aspect that can be engineered out of a project. So say we often think that, okay, acceptance could be related to the topic of noise, and then if only we get rid of noise, people will accept wind. But that's definitely not how I found it to be the case. And I think most of you who work on wind, you will recognize that, the acceptance or attitudes toward winds is a kind of combination of complex aspects related to technology and design, but also related to landscape and related also most importantly to a process through which these technologies become part of our landscapes and everyday life. So I think in my own work, I'm trying to kind of navigate between the complexity of these different aspects in how they could be part of the tools that we design. And I think digitalization, increasingly has this ability to capture a diversity of aspects, right? When we're thinking about integration of the different types of knowledge, we can imagine solutions that focus on technology and design. We have different types of solutions that focus on the landscape. And now we have more and more tools that also focus on process. And some of them try to integrate that all together. So I think in the examples that I will show you today, it's of the digital tools and how I worked on them, it's often relates to this. They often relate to these concerns, and you try to improve on them. But at the same time, I would always argue, there is no one silver bullet solution. So I think we also have to be realistic, but also maybe gentle with ourselves on that. So maybe I think with starting off the acceptance, I think many of us know that this kind of famous model of acceptance, where we have a triangle of the different types of socio-political, community, and market acceptance, which basically goes to say that we shouldn't confuse the attitudes of people on the ground with the market and the socio-political, so maybe the kind of acceptance at the national level, right? And so that's what we often see, and what we try to often model, I think, is that there is a difference between trying to say, like, okay, whether people are likely to be in favor of wind energy in general, when we could look at the national energy transition agenda, versus local projects that come with all different types of local concerns and ideas about place attachment or process fairness, right? So these are all the different dynamics. So I just wanted to make a distinction here about it. And then, of course, in my own work, I attempt to look at wind energy governance from this kind of timeline perspective, where, to me, we too often focus only on the planning and implementation phase. So that's both how most researchers or experts will consider where societal issues come in, or where when public needs to be consulted is when the planning is already happening, or when projects are going to be implemented. But somehow we don't see so many opportunities, or we don't consider that participation is possible at the design phases, right? When we as experts are working on digital technologies or on wind turbine designs. But that's also just an assumption. And I think we see that with emergence of this kind of digital twin solutions, or this kind of more interactive digital participation tools, we could consider, there is a possibility to co-create some future scenarios, or to engage in the very early stages of participation. And that's, in a matter of fact, also what we're trying to do now with our Code Wind project, right, Sarah? So things are changing, but I think that comes from, I think, also the belief that the design stage is important. And so is then this kind of last phase of management and use, and maybe up until the commissioning of wind energy projects, when, okay, they already there, but we also see that there are needs for participation, for communication, for dealing with emerging concerns, perhaps. So that's, I think we also need both that kind of mental shift from, okay, when projects are there, they are there, so we don't have to worry, don't have to think about the public or the social concerns. Adversely, we actually need both tools and solutions and processes to stay in communication and to keep people engaged. This looks a little bit cut, but still, the title says from public acceptance to collaborative governance. And so these are the kind of big buzzwords from social science around co-design, co-creation, and co-production. You might have heard them already, and I think I'm not here to be dogmatic about what means what, but I think I just want to say that these concepts become important because digital solutions start offering this kind of opportunity to almost like rethink how do we want to engage in the relationship between people, experts, and technology with our landscape or nature. And maybe more traditionally, we had this idea that, experts design the technologies, publics have to accept them, and then society, they will be part of our landscape and nature. And I think that not only we have new opportunities to see the relationship maybe between wind turbines and the landscape, right? Like the digital twins can kind of almost interact with their environments, right? We can capture that complexity better, but we can also think, okay, how could people be part of this twinning, let's say, process, and also how they could design or be part of the tools. And so, in a way, these concepts of co-design, co-creation, and co-production are all trying to say, okay, how do you draw the arrows between what influences what, right? Or you think that the experts influence the technology, or would you also draw an arrow from like the people can influence the technology, or the people can influence the landscape, or the people can, or maybe does the nature influence also somehow, the technology or people? So I think if you were at the side of co-production, you would draw arrows in all directions. You would say everything influences everything, and so we need that complexity. I think in co-design you would maybe say that it's either people or experts who can influence technology and landscape. Co-creation may be somewhere in between, where you can decide whether it's more people or more experts. Depends how you negotiate, right? Who has the level of influence. So there's just a food for thought of that. That's in principle, it's an open-ended question, right? So yes, we have this societal aspect, and then we have also the new forms of digital participation or digital tools, right? We not only have wind, but we also have a bunch of different technologies, whether these are like the very advanced expert technologies like digital twins, or are they more like sensing technologies, or the kind of monitoring technologies that people anyone basically can use nowadays to learn about performance, to interact with objects that are not even in their maybe direct proximity. And of course, the mobile phone that we all have, and it gives us access to more and more information. So I'll give some examples of how you can investigate maybe the digitalization in wind from this kind of social science point of view. So I would say on one hand, we see that there is a clear, change that we can observe in how experts start using the digital tools. And on the other, I think it's also the how it changes the way in which people experience and engage with either wind energy plants or wind energy landscapes. And so maybe to start from the design stage, I think the digital twins or concept is really, I think, prominent, regardless of maybe many of you think, how realistic is the digital twin, how much of it is actually a real twin, or how much is it just an advanced simulation. I think the concept on its own, I think it's quite powerful and present in many digital twinning projects that I myself participated on or advised on in maybe advisory boards, where projects try to provide more and more accurate vision for the future of how wind energy could be part of our energy systems, right? And so as part of one of this kind of projects called Upwards during my PhD, when we tried to design a kind of digital twin / a very advanced prototype of a future wind turbine, and includes the aspect of acceptance. I'll explain how we tried to do that in this project to give you some ideas on kind of integration of social science knowledge into this more advanced technical projects. And I think key questions that I then also asked myself, and I think are from the kind of social point of view, it's also understanding actually how digital twins are designed. For what are we designing them? Right? Are we doing it to increase the size of wind turbines? Are we doing it to optimize the performance in the landscape, to maximize energy production? Or are we doing it to, optimize for societal preferences? Are we doing it to integrate biodiversity knowledge? And I think what often happens is I notice that, if we have a bunch of experts who care about some topic and, convinced that this is the right way forward, then we are likely to do it. So I guess if we were a consortium today, of all people interested in wind, perhaps we wouldn't have a work package on biodiversity and monitoring, because no one is either an expert or seems to worry about this topic. And but it does not go to say that it's not important. In fact, I'm actually on an advisory project of a project that provides a digital twin for offshore winds. with also focus on biodiversity potentially aspects. So I think this is just, I think for me, a big finding is that, digitalization and design of digital twins is this kind of active process where it is not indeed only translating, as Sarah said, zeros and ones. It's actually deciding, what aspects of reality are we translating and which aspects we're not. So I'm just jumping to another slide to see what I'll be at next. But in this aspect, I think it's really, I think, important to kind of remember that we as experts have, I think, real effects on how the social or ecological aspects are captured or not. And then another tool that I looked into in one of my studies was actually at the operational phase, right? So once let's say the wind farm is already existing, I looked at the case of a noise app where a developer developed this kind of app to communicate about the noise levels around wind farm, and they asked the community to provide feedback on how they experience noise and try to develop strategies for how to deal with that. So I also had a bunch of interesting results on how this solution worked, but also did not work for some people. So I'll also present few takeaways from that. So maybe now diving into this example of a noise app, I think it's a really interesting one in how digital solutions for societal problems become very much complicated. So I think the initiative, the idea was very simple, but also very a good intention to actually try to communicate better with residents about noise levels. So what happened is that the community was really complaining about the noise levels around wind farm. And then the developer said, okay, what do we do? Maybe we need to provide them better knowledge actually about the noise levels, because it seemed that some people were claiming that the wind farm was extremely loud, where others were saying that they experience, terrible levels of noise at their home. And they said, okay, let's just communicate about what is the level of noise for your house. So they give very tailored, let's say, noise information for residents around 2 kilometers around the wind farm. And they said, okay, in a decibel, you can see what is the amount of noise right now. And then people could press a button from green to red on how annoyed they are. And the developer could kind of get this information and analyze it and say okay, this is the pattern in how people are annoyed, or when they are annoyed, or under what circumstances, what time of the day, etc., etc. So this kind of ambition to have, on one hand, almost like big data, a lot of information, seemed from the engineering perspective like a great thing to do. However, it also resulted in a lot of local controversy. And why? Is because that there is this kind of promise that we will do a lot of real-time monitoring, and we will continue giving kind of information about the current situation, but also the kind of gathering the feedback from people. And people felt like they were just asked to continue contributing feedback without actual kind of the coupling of what happens with this information, who gets this information, and if someone is angry, they will do it once or twice, but they will not do it every day. So I think from that perspective, there was already a big mismatch in expectation. And then in fact, at the level of interpretation of the results, a very different, stories emerge where community were saying we are more and more annoyed, but we just don't want to use this app anymore. And the developer or the company were saying hey, we are seeing less complaints. People, apparently our solutions are working because right now it's just only these 5 people who every day press that they are annoyed, but for the rest, people stop complaining. So it must be better. And I think this is the kind of I think trouble with general, quality of information is that it's not always the virtual reality. The data is not always a perfect representation of how people feel. And then there is, of course, this bunch of issues around trust and participation. When if people feel like they don't trust the company or they don't trust the solution, they are not going to support it. And in fact, when I started to do the research on this topic, I found that while this tool existed, the community actually started their own mailing list and their own repository of evidence to counter the noise, up to say like our own repository of complaints proves that we actually have a problem, but we are not going to contribute insights into your app. So this was quite a shocking finding for me at the time. But it really also showed that the way in which experts sometimes define the problem is so far away from how people experience it that there is a fundamental mismatch in it. And what turned out is that actually even the definition of noise was completely disaligned between how experts said this is the amount of decibel, this is what you experience, towards people saying like that number tells and nothing about how I feel. And even more, I read or I experience right now is a hum tone or low frequency noise, and definitely way beyond the 2 kilometer distance around the wind farm. So it really kind of made me also question how design of digital participation solutions and the kind of all frames that we come in through our expert knowledge or through our more like scientific boundary setting actually becomes a subject of controversy. So that, I think, became really a base for me to say, okay, when we actually design these digital tools, we not only have to be super transparent, but also explicit about what's included and what's excluded, and how these definitions are oftentimes not shared. So when I look at this kind of, solutions now, I'm really thinking, it's you really giving a solution that it's let's say a function of what your definition of a problem is, rather than thinking about how are the perceptions actually of wind turbine sound experienced and shared locally. So I think that subjectivity is somehow is really important, and it's very difficult to capture it directly in the context of digital tools and solutions. So then I had this kind of conceptual mind let's say map where I said, okay, everything that's inside the bubble, right, is how experts tend to think, and about how we draw relationship between what is the going into the tool and what's going out of the tool, right? How we have our thought process of almost a kind of nice linear from A to B, how we can get from a problem to a solution. And then everything that goes out of it is this kind of societal overflows, that the things that we cannot capture, the things that we cannot digitalize, and they kind of exist in the society, and they will challenge that bubble and actually make, as a result, show that the problem not only persists, but sometimes can even amplify. So yeah, I think then I would like kind of conceptually just define that, and this like the content here is not so much important as the kind of way of thinking about it, is that we have this kind of process of capturing, and that's what digitalization is doing. Through people involved in the process, we capture parts of reality, and then the other part of it is that there are always overflows, and we not often are aware of them, or we're not aware of how alternative definitions emerge, how alternative solutions emerge, and how actually people want to be involved in it. So I think the bottom line would be then is that actually we need to ask about this. And so what we can do is try to capture concerns in a little bit more broad way. So instead of only just, asking, how noise can be defined, in a scientific ways, and how much noise people experience, which often tells people not much, is, you can actually ask people how you experience wind turbine sound and learn about the aspects that are a subject of concern that relate to them. So when I was studying this topic of noise, that I found that it's so much related to people's concerns about health, different types of tonality, about how people share experiences, convince each other, and in a way you cannot, understand the solutions without understanding these dynamics. And the same comes when you actually dealing with interpretation of digitalization outputs, right? Once you've designed your digital twin, or you designed your app, or you designed any digital solution for your work, you kind of interpreting what the outcomes are, what they could do for whom, and also interpreting results. And oftentimes people might, have very different interpretations, and at the same time often little access to this experts process of interpretation. So we kind of tend to assume that scientists should analyze this data that, for example, people provide. But oftentimes people want to know, people want to have the access of, like what happens with my data, or how do you draw conclusions on it. And for example, in the case of this noise app, it was a really like a big issue for the community, that they didn't have access into the data that they were providing, that they didn't know what other people say, or they didn't know what is the overall conclusion that the experts were drawing from it, because they were not coupled back with them. So I think that's the general takeaway is that for the social, aspect of digital solutions, it's really important to share the data actually, and to communicate about what kind of conclusions you're drawing, and be transparent about why. And then when, these technological solutions are there, I think we also really need to kind of keep in mind that they often a function of, what we believe is a right direction for the future, right? So if we're thinking that we want smarter environments, that we want more efficient wind farms, and we want tools that help experts to be more efficient in their work, then it is sometimes going to disalign with people's ideas about desirability, right, of the different future scenarios. So for people, for experts, often bigger wind turbines are better, right? They produce more energy, they're just more efficient. That is also the symbol of engineering progress, right? Like bigger is where we want to go. But for many of communities or stakeholders, there might be different preferences, or there might be different ideas, and I think we often forget that this kind of misalignments exist. So then when I would put digitalization in the social light of Sarah's also definition, I would say digitalization is not only this process of making value of data, it's also actually a very active process of experts, trying to identify what the value can be and what concerns make it, right? Are we saying we want to focus on efficiency? Are we trying to say we want to get the most, monetary value? Or are we saying that we want to create solutions that, help participation, that they help integrate maybe indeed biodiversity, or, account for nature? These are all open questions. And I think digitalization is that as well. It's not only the let's say the process on its own as it exists. So if I have time, but not much, I think I will have to skip the part of digitalization of acceptance. So I had this one on more example from my PhD where we tried to digitalize acceptance in the context of digital twin project. I guess I can put it in the presentation so you can have a look at it if you're interested. But it was mainly about how you could translate acceptance as this one aspect of let's say the social component of a digital twin, and we kind of narrowed it down to acceptance of noise. And because translating acceptance and societal components, societal reality is so difficult, it's so complex, and you always have to pick, and you always have to decide, okay, what you will focus on. And in doing that, you also, steering somehow, the discussion towards that issue as well. So I think that was my key takeaway, that once, you say, acceptance is related to, for example, noise, you can do so much, but you can include regulation, you can account for that, you can try to decrease the number of noise, you can make better simulations about where you will be planning the wind farms, so to avoid people's being impacted. But at the end of the day, it's the people themselves need to decide it on ground, and they not always relate, to this kind of rational optimization, let's say, exercises as something that corresponds with their reality. Unfortunately, Yuri is laughing, so I understand that this is something maybe for you of interest as well, of how this could be done. So then I think a key takeaway also from our project on this digital twin was to say, yes, we can integrate social components. We can make a step in trying to, open up this discussion about what is relevant for the public to also simulate or visualize in some way. But we also have to see these tools from this kind of bigger perspective, where we're thinking about, people being actually engaged in the process of both design, planning, or management, rather than just being accounted for. And I think that's a very crucial difference between, just trying to solve problems for the people or trying to do it together. And so then I have this few dilemmas that maybe we can take on board also in our discussion, and also to just open up a discussion about if we design these tools, if we think about digitalization, what kind of embedded ideas do we integrate them about efficiency, right? Is it the bigger is better, or do we think about society and energy transition from a bigger perspective, where we're thinking about, how could we develop tools that help us further in this process, whether it's including wind or other technologies, and how we account their full nature and for societal concerns. So, and that also relates, of course, to speed, because you can say, sometimes you have to slow down for these aspects, and that's not always in line with our objectives to go faster, right, for the energy transition. So I think there is this kind of fundamental, I think, mismatch in our ambitions to go fast and to go slow sometimes. So thanks for that. I'll try to wrap up so that we have enough time for our Mentimeter. So I'll pass it now, I think, back to you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Where you can take maybe some ideas from people and questions.
Yeah, maybe we can see if people have got questions first, and we can do the Mentimeter after that. So does anyone have any questions? We get the
chat. Maybe stop sharing.
Hi, Elena. Jorge. Do you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Yes. Greetings from Karlsruhe. Yes, I'm electrical engineer. This is really very, very interesting. Last week I was reading a lot of news and stuff about that. For instance, in the United States, the left and the right agree only on one thing, and that is no data centers. There is a really backslash against data centers because of different reasons. really like all the reasons you exposed with wind. I was wondering if I mean it's very. I mean you can translate all these digital solutions to that space, or and see how. I mean, what I want to say is that it seems like in the planning stage, I mean, it's like people is not taken into account in the planning stage. I mean, they all these solutions comes after. I mean, after the when the problem arises. No? So yeah, basically, how I don't know if you have read or gather some information from these problems that they're really big, in the USA with data centers and now wind farms.
Yeah, no, it's I think interesting observe because I think it relates actually to wind as well in that actually a lot of wind farms are being also now built for data centers, and we also see opposition there
Yeah.
to the fact that the energy production is a contested topic for people who seem, like in Netherlands, for example, there was also a very big data center project that was very opposed because it's just huge energy consumption and it's also huge footprint. And I think there is this kind of fundamental mismatch, I think, between people reliance on technologies and the realization of their energy needs. And I think we were discussing it also in our project that I think part of the premise of also digitalization is to make that more explicit to people and also to make the trades-off more explicit, right? So I think that's also where I think digital tools can help to try to say, and engage people with the questions of energy, both demand and supply, and to make it actual, responsibility and problem of people. So I don't have very good solutions for that, but I think it's also crazy, of course, how much this data centers use energy. But I think just making it a topic of debate, I think, is necessary because otherwise we're letting also companies direct the direction there, and maybe there should be a discussion about it.
Yeah. It's funny to see how, I mean, data centers is like a problem is like the demand, like the consumption and the water. They are placed in near lakes in the USA, for cooling. Okay, and but these data centers are like demand, they are load, and in your case, in the case of wind farms, it's the opposite. They are producing, but it's it's the same problem with noise and that stuff. That's really interesting. Yeah. Because in acceptance that changes. I mean, I'm more positive towards something that produces somehow psychologically. Related to something that demands, absorbs. I don't know. It's really complex.
Yeah, interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking
I
questions.
think Jonathan's got a question as well. It's just my assumption by the fact that his camera he turned his camera on, ready to make a question, to ask a question. Is it true?
Yes, you're right. But I was just waiting to leave space for others. But and I thought I can probably look it up. I was just gonna ask about the part that you skipped over quickly that you didn't have time for, because that was what I was most particularly interested in about the
Can't do everything.
But if there's no time, I can reach out, or I can just look at the relevant projects that you did. But yeah, I'm interested in that particularly.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm definitely happy to share both the presentation and maybe some of the project information. I guess if I'm giving now the opportunity to use some of the Q&A time to talk more about it, is that we really tried to translate this aspect, the complex aspect of acceptance in context of a digital twin of a future that was at the time 15 megawatt wind turbine, and try to say, okay, if you were to simulate that, what would be the societal effect, you know, and how could you incorporate maybe some of the acceptance discussions in the kind of simulation. And then we said, okay, perhaps the easiest way to do it, and that was like several years back now. So I think my ideas would also now a bit evolve, but I think that you know the easiest way is to translate acceptance also into a noise annoyance, because at the time we saw that a lot of opposition was the most, let's say, empowered by noise limits, right? So say you're concerned about wind, you able to oppose it based on, you know, the fact that it's too noisy, and then we were saying, okay, like how about, you know, adjusting then, or how does it compare to the limits that we have? Could we, you know, visualize both the effect on the environment, but also say like, okay, how does it relate to different noise limits that different regions or countries have for day, for night? Could we, you know, imagine, you know, a simulation scenario where we're optimizing for it? So what would be then the parameters in which we have to work, both in terms of noise limits or that are then voluntary, let's say, and how to, let's say, how to find then the optimization between that and the power production. And now later on, we also kind of translated the idea, okay, for now, for example, for smart curtailment with birds and bats, you know, how can you find the optimal for, you know, birds migration times and energy production times? And so I think this is the kind of, you know, these are the kind of examples where you can combine the engineering ethos with societal or ecological concerns. I think it shows that it can work in some cases, but I think it also shows that there are cases when this is way more difficult. You cannot translate or digitalize very easily people's attachment to a place. It's very difficult to give it, you know, a number, and more even difficult to actually, you know, combine that with some type of regulation or ideas of good practices, you know.
And then it's different in every country and every as well. Is it okay if we cut this off now because it's 16:02?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You can talk to Jonathan more because he's in the CodeWin project as well. So. Yeah, people have asked so many questions and talked so much that, first of all, we haven't had time for the Mentimeter, and second of all, I haven't had time to ask my hundreds of questions, so I'll have to do that later as well. I hope that was really interesting for all you listening as well, and people listening to the recording. I think it's fascinating to hear from a different world, basically. I mean, we tend to underestimate all these human factors, but I think once we do realize they're important, it's very difficult for us to work out how to deal with them. Like they are there. What do we do now? Our engineering minds are getting lost, and so I think it's great to have people like Helena who are trying to transition between these worlds. So yeah, it was great to hear from you. And I think if anyone's got any more questions, can you maybe put your email in the chat, because the chat stays active also when we close.
Yes. Yeah.
And we'll put the recording on the website anyway. And you can contact Helena through me at any time as well if you want to talk. So thanks again for listening, and hope to see you all at any future events. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I saw many familiar faces from the past year also. And, so yeah, thank you for participating. If you have any questions or would like to just catch up, let me know. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.